Hi, and welcome to Elevate Women Leading the Way in Pharma Outsourcing, a speaker series from Vector Talent for women working in the complex and fast-paced pharmaceutical outsourcing industry. My name is Marianne Gissane, Director at Vector, and in this series, we're bringing together accomplished women leaders to share their insights, experiences, and strategies for professional growth. So whether you're looking to advance your career, navigate challenges, or gain new perspectives, these conversations are designed to inspire and equip you with the practical advice you need to take your career to the next level. Today's session is all about a skill that can truly transform your career, managing up. So whether you're communicating with senior leadership, influencing decision makers, or ensuring that your contributions are recognized, managing up is a powerful tool for success. To guide us through this topic, I'm thrilled to introduce Debra Bruneau, Executive Vice President of Human Resources at JSR Life Sciences. With over 20 years of experience partnering with C-suite leaders, Debra is a proven leader in driving business transformation and building high-performing cultures. As a trusted advisor, Debra has influenced executive decision-making and strengthened global teams. Her deep understanding of how to create value through people makes her the perfect guide for today's topic on managing up, a skill that she's passionate about developing throughout her own team. So Debra, welcome to the series and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Great. So Debra, I just want to start with the question of how would you define managing up and why is it such a critical skill for career progression?
It's a really great and important place to start, setting the foundation and making sure we're all sort of speaking the same language. If you Google managing up, I don't exactly agree with the definition because as you stated in your intro, it's really about how do you communicate to decision makers. So whether that's up, down, or across, it's really about how you communicate either an important message or when you need advice or you need input or you're just communicating information. It's really about understanding your audience. But as you get further and further along in your career and you are developing these communications with senior leaders, it's really important to understand your audience. So that's what managing up is about. It's really about how do you effectively communicate with decision makers.
I would say it's almost not even just managing up, but it's really this concept of strategic communications, but interpersonal communications then.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think the thing that gets lost in communication, where we all talk about listening as the most
Yeah.
important part, which we could have a whole other session on, but this is really about understanding your audience. And it's really about thinking not what I need to communicate or what's important to me, but what's important to the person who I'm speaking with. What is necessary for them? What is the input that they need to hear or understand? And oftentimes that gets lost because it's so much about me, the speaker, or me, the communicator. So it's really about understanding your audience and thinking through what's important to them.
Yeah. That sounds like that's probably one of the most significant challenges when thinking about, this art of managing up. But what are some additional challenges that people might be facing when they're thinking about how do I execute managing up or strategic communications and how can they potentially overcome some of those?
Yeah, it's really a dance, right? It's really
Yeah.
about a balance and truly understanding it changes. So I'm not a one size fits all kind of
Yeah.
leader, and I don't think anyone should be, especially around communication. But it's about, how do I manage this one-on-one time that I have with this individual? We're all so busy and we have information coming at us from a variety of different modalities, especially with social media and our phones and iPads and computers. And there's just so much
Yeah.
coming at us quickly. And so you really need to distill your information and make sure that it's quick, concise, and you get to the point. And there's so many YouTube videos, LinkedIn training. I mean, you can
Yeah.
Google this till your heart's content, but it's about you, the communicator, and the relationship you have with the person that you're speaking with. So sometimes there is no relationship. You could be a
Yeah.
speaker at a big event, or you could be invited to come to one of these working group sessions or we used to call them hacks at a previous company, and you don't know the people in the audience,
Yeah.
but you have to think about why am I here? right?
Mm-hmm.
What is the point of my being here? Why am I asked to bring this information? And take a step back to say, if I was person X, how would I
Mm-hmm.
want this information? What is important for me as person X, whether it's a CEO, a CFO, maybe it's a manager in manufacturing, maybe it's your own supervisor. But it's
Mm-hmm.
important to think about it from your perspective and the perspective of the person on the other side of the desk, if you will, or
Yeah.
the virtual screen. So it's not one size fits all. So try to remember that when you're
Mm-hmm.
communicating. Don't say, well, this worked for me in the past, so I'm going to keep doing this thing.
Yeah.
You can until it
Yeah.
doesn't work. And ask for feedback. As you build
Yeah.
that relationship with the person that you're communicating with, ask
Mm-hmm.
for feedback. Say, did that work for you? Would you
Yeah.
give me any advice to do it differently? Especially when it's someone you trust, those
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one opportunities that you have with either your manager or another senior leader. There's also opportunity for you to maybe bounce it off of another colleague who might have a
Yeah.
different or better relationship with that person that you're
Mm-hmm.
meeting with. Leverage those experiences and
Yeah.
those relationships. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And
Mm-hmm.
don't never, ever, ever think you have to know it all. I've
Yes.
sat in some organizations where you would get attacked or sniped if you
Mm-hmm.
didn't know the answers. All I'll say to you is that's not the kind of environment you should be in. And that's not the
Mm-hmm.
kind of leader you should be when you do end up being a leader. Give people grace. And it is okay
Yeah.
to say, I actually don't know, but I'll research that and I'll get right back to you. Or I
Mm-hmm.
know this colleague has that information. Let me reach out to that person and I'll get right back to you. It is okay whether you're 5 minutes into your career or 50
Yeah.
years into your career.
Mm-hmm.
No one is expected to know it all. All we ask is that you're honest, you're
Mm-hmm.
transparent, and you agree to find the information at some point.
Yeah, yeah. There's a few things that you said just there that really stood out. I think when you're thinking about doing kind of like a structured speaking engagement or something where you know you're going to be speaking to an audience, I think people are much more intentional about thinking through their audience and listening to the conversation from their perspective or planning for that. But that's equally as important when you're going into these one-on-one meetings, whether it's with your manager or you're presenting to senior leadership. Having kind of that intentional mindset in the communications is really key, regardless of what that modality or that format really is.
And the thing
So,
you said that is so important is intentional.
mhm.
Oftentimes we go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. We actually don't
Yeah.
prep, right? Because we don't think we need to. And I think when you're earlier on in career, as you're trying to
Hmm.
establish your relationship or your
Hmm.
reputation, it's more important for you to plan and to be
Hmm.
intentional about that time that you're spending with that person. But I will tell you, even
Yeah.
20, 25 years in, I make a little agenda. I keep it right
Yeah.
on the side of my desk, even with my manager, who's the CEO and the president of our division. His time is so precious, and I'm grateful
Yes.
for every
Hmm.
minute I have that I don't want
Hmm.
to waste it. I don't want him to walk out of
Yeah.
that meeting going, why did I just spend 30 minutes that I can't get back? Right? So I
Yeah.
am intentional, even at this point in my career,
Hmm.
because it's important not only for my own time, but for
Yeah.
that person's time too. And there are little tips and tricks you can do. Some people have a little cheat sheet on their
Hmm.
desk, or like I said, I have my iPad right next to me, and I
Yeah.
create a little agenda because you get into this conversation. How is, like we were just doing it? How are your
Yeah.
holidays? What are you doing coming up? And you
Yeah.
want to you want to have time for that, that
Hmm.
downtime to build a relationship with this person, but you also want to get to the meat of the conversation, right? Here are the 5 things I need to either tell you or I need your decision on or whatever. And knowing
Yeah.
that, being intentional in that meeting is really important. So I'm glad that you brought that up because it's a
Yeah.
lost art, to be honest.
Yeah, it's funny because you're right. There's definitely that art of building the relationship and building that personal connection that you want to have in those meetings. But I also think of how often do you leave a meeting thinking, oh, this could have just been an email, or this could have just been like a Teams chat or a Slack message because it's kind of winded its way around multiple topics. So, having setting that agenda, even just for yourself, to make sure that you're covering those topics that you want to, is so crucial. Just from, everyone's time is precious, even more so when you're moving up in your career, you're dealing with senior leaders. So wanting to make sure you're making the most of those minutes you have is so crucial. So
Agree. And it's like you
yeah,
said, it's your own benefit too. It's not just for
it's your
that
own
person.
time.
Yeah, it's time
Yeah.
well spent.
Yeah, exactly. Thinking through, when, particularly when you're working with senior leaders, or your goal is really around influencing, potential senior leaders, are there specific communication strategies that you try to coach your team through when it comes to aiming for that influencing goal of influencing senior leaders towards a certain decision or a certain perspective?
Yeah, and again, it's making sure you understand the senior leader, right? So I'll
Mm-hmm.
share a story with you. So I was probably mid-career.
Mm-hmm.
I was working in a company with mostly engineers, and this was my first
Yeah.
time being surrounded by very detail-oriented, math-oriented, black and white. HR is not black and white. There's
A
very
little
little
different.
that we do that's black and white. But so I'm a storyteller because in my
Hmm.
job, it's about sharing the experience and the behaviors and the feelings and all the things
Hmm.
leading
Yeah,
up to, because it's people. I deal with people
exactly.
and it is very emotional. It's not black and white. And I was the HR business partner to a former retired military man who ended up sharing an experience with me that really shaped my career moving forward and the
Hmm.
way that I think and the way that I communicate. And as I said, I was like 10, 15 years into my career. And what I learned was that he wants facts. He wants,
Hmm.
get me from A to Z really quickly and succinctly. We'll talk
Hmm.
about it. And then if I need the story, tell me. But I don't want the
Yeah.
story first and then the
Yeah.
decision. He was all about don't hide the headline, right? And so for
Hmm.
me, that was really enlightening because I said, oh, I'm presenting to him like me instead of
Hmm.
saying, oh, he wants things that are very orderly and he
Hmm.
wants the punchline up front and then add the
Yeah.
story after. How many times have you sat in a meeting where the person is talking, you've already read the slides, and you're like,
Yeah.
please advance, please advance, right?
Too
And
often.
right, exactly. And remember, we're all human. If you
Yeah.
feel that way, the likelihood that someone else on the other end of the screen or the room feels that way is probably pretty high. And so understand the person that you're speaking with. Okay, how do
Hmm.
I do that, right? Because you don't always know. You get invited to these meetings.
Yeah.
Remember that time is of the essence.
Hmm.
So don't overload your slides. Lead
Hmm.
with the deadline, lead with the story, lead with the end game, and then fill
Hmm.
in the blanks. So many people sort of build up, and I need to lead you down this path. No, you don't. Tell me where we are and what we
Hmm.
need to do to get there. What do you need from me in this meeting? Understand the goal of the meeting, right? Ask
Yeah.
up front. If you're being
Hmm.
invited to a working group session or if it's just a one on one, ask what is the goal of this meeting? What do
Hmm.
you need from me? Because again, what you said, it's going with intention, but it's not your intention.
Yes.
When you're
Hmm.
attending meetings that you're an attendee, it's actually not about you, it's about the person who is communicating or needs to be
Hmm.
communicated to. So, understanding the goal, asking the goal or the purpose, what do you need from me? Am I just
Yeah.
attending? Do you need an
Hmm.
action item? Do you need a decision from me? What is the goal? And oftentimes, in one on ones, as an example, I will say to my team, these are your meetings. They're not about me at
Hmm.
all. Whatever it is you want to talk about, if you need help with a problem, if you need me to back you up on something, you just need to gripe because at HR it's very lonely. It's hard to gripe to someone who
Yeah.
doesn't truly understand what you do. I'm happy to have a vent session with you, but every one on one is about you. Sure, there might be things that I need to ask you about or I have a question on,
Hmm.
but for the most part, these meetings are yours. So come with intention, come with a purpose. But as we were saying before, we're often so busy that we don't plan for those meetings, and sometimes
Hmm.
they're not the most productive. And that's okay. Not every single meeting is going to be perfect, or you're going to walk away thinking, wow, that was the best meeting I ever had. I can't wait to do it again. I don't think anyone ever does that. But really understanding your role in the meeting and what the
Yeah.
goal is will help set you on a path that allows you to communicate more effectively.
Yeah, I think what you just noted in terms of like that flexibility, I'm the same way as you. I love the story. I love sometimes, kind of leading up to what that big reveal is. But when it comes to, precious time and really the way people, their preferences for receiving information and what's important to them, like you said, knowing what your role is going into those meetings, knowing what the purpose is and what is being asked of you is really so important. And sometimes we just don't take the time to ask that question. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm sure you do, but I get meetings put on my calendar and I'm just thinking, okay, what's the purpose of this meeting? What do I need to do to prepare? What's my role? And having that from the get-go versus waiting until you get into the meeting to ask that can just do so much in terms of helping you feel more confident and being prepared to go into that meeting.
And
So,
being present, right? If you're like, I
yeah.
don't know why I'm at this meeting, so I'm going to multitask. It happens all the
Yes.
time. Or you're
Yeah.
checked out. You're thinking like, I
Yeah.
have to finish my Christmas list, or I have to get
Yeah.
my grocery list, or I have to pick this kid up or drop this kid off, or
Yeah.
we have so much going on in our minds, but I can't say that there's been a rare occasion where, unless it's a one-on-one, where I've said, oh, why are you inviting why am I being invited to this
Yeah.
meeting? I'll just go. And
Yeah.
hopefully it is apparent, but you're right. I mean,
Yeah.
taking the time to say, hey, do you need me at this? What is the purpose? What is my goal? How often do you get a meeting invite where there's an actual agenda in there
Yes.
and it
Yeah.
says, this is what we want to cover? Very rarely.
Yeah.
But it's
And
a
really that should
good
be the
tool.
standard. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So everyone's
Absolutely.
on the same page. Yeah.
Exactly.
One of the things that I've been thinking about in light of the example that you just shared, kind of the difference between, your way, your communication style and telling stories, and maybe someone who is thinking from a more kind of strategic directive perspective, is around visibility and recognition of accomplishments, particularly as women working in a predominantly male industry. Thinking about communication styles and communication strategies, how can women ensure that the work that they're doing, the contributions that they're making are recognized by leadership, particularly when they're in a fast-paced environment, they have limited time with senior leaders or working with predominantly male teams? How can they leverage their contributions for increased visibility and recognition?
It's a great question, and it's hard to unpack. And
Hmm.
while obviously being female and raising young daughters, or actually they're young
Hmm.
ladies now, it's something I'm very passionate about. It's not so gender specific,
Hmm.
but for the purposes of the question, we feel uncomfortable as a gender
Yeah.
sometimes. For the purposes of this, we're just speaking in generalities. Um, that we feel like we're boastful, or it feels
Hmm.
uncomfortable to say, hey, I did this, 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 and this. But it's
Yeah.
important to get comfortable with talking about your accomplishments and the
Hmm.
things that you've achieved either that week, that month, especially if something was challenging. I mean, be proud
Yeah.
about it, right? And we're not
Hmm.
asking you to walk into a meeting, whether it's in a group setting or one-on-one, banging on your chest saying, hey, look what I did. There's a way to communicate about your accomplishments, and when it feels uncomfortable, the advice I give is pretend you're boasting about someone else.
Hmm.
Pretend it's not you, but pretend you're doing it for me or for another colleague. Look what my colleague was able to
Yeah.
accomplish today. Your frame of mind and your framework changes
Yes.
completely because you feel proud. You're able
Hmm.
to do it in a way that doesn't feel uncomfortable. And so my advice would be change the story in your head in those moments when you're uncomfortable and share those stories. And it can be very at the very beginning. Oh my gosh, I have to tell
Hmm.
you this funny thing. Look at what happened this
Yeah.
week. And you can do it whatever is your way of sharing stories or accomplishments. Don't try to be someone that you're not. That's the first
Hmm.
advice I'd give anyone, but especially women. Don't try to mirror what works for someone else because you're not that person. And you'll get more
Yeah.
and more comfortable with it as you develop in your career. But authenticity is the most important
Yes.
any leader characteristic, no matter where you are in your journey. And so, for any leader, including a female or a male, whomever, it's important to be authentic to who you are. So, I'm giving you advice that I have seen work, that has worked for me specifically. But you have to find what's comfortable for you. I think changing the framework is the one that works
Yeah.
most for most people because that feels comfortable to cheer on a colleague. So I
Yeah.
think that's important to do, but find little ways to do it. You can forward an email. If someone thanks you or thanks someone on your team, you can share that with your boss, your manager, or someone else in a different department. Hey, I just had to share this. I was so excited. It was such a tough week that this was the nugget that, got me
Yeah.
through. You can do those kinds of things, and it's impactful, but it doesn't feel boastful. So finding
Yeah.
those little opportunities where you can sort of weave those into the conversations, I think is a best practice.
Yeah. I love what you said there because a few months ago we did a webinar on negotiation, and that's exactly one of the pieces that we talked about is how it was a webinar for negotiation for women. And one of the skills that we talked about was that frame of reference and changing that frame of reference because there's been studies that have shown that women were much more aggressive in their negotiation if they were negotiating on
Yep,
behalf of someone else. So if it was like
absolutely.
a pay raise for someone
Yep.
else or benefits for someone else compared to when they were negotiating for themselves. So I love that you brought that up. That's what instantly popped into my mind is that it is much for whatever reason, it is much easier for us to advocate on someone else's behalf versus ourselves, but to just change that frame of reference can make such a difference. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Takes the pressure
yeah.
off you, right? And like I said,
Yeah.
it makes you feel like I can do this.
Yeah. And I love too this idea of, recognizing your wins throughout the way. Cause I think sometimes we sit down when it's time to do our performance review and it's time to do our look back for the next year. And that's when we're, trying to come up with our list of our recognitions or our accomplishments versus, noting that and celebrating that throughout the year and making that full process easier on the back end, but also, raising the flag on those wins throughout the year as well and getting that visibility that way.
It
So,
is. And another example I'll share with you is at one point in my career, we were dealing with a really challenging leader who was pretty high up in the organization. And a lot of staff members felt intimidated and uncomfortable communicating with this person. And so during an email exchange, I found my voice in a different way. And I don't know if it just caught me at the right time. I can't tell you what the secret sauce was. I think probably I was just
yeah.
frustrated. And I was able to communicate in a very professional but pointed way. And the person responded back. And it was the first time I felt like, gosh, this person is hearing me. And it resonated with how he or she was behaving. And I actually forwarded that on to another leader in the organization and just said, hey, I think we're finally getting through to this person. And I didn't mean
Yeah.
it about me personally. It was really sharing that, hey, I think we're finally going to see some different behavior. Unbeknownst to me, that leader spoke to another leader and said, hey, Deborah had this way of communicating that you could probably benefit from. Why don't you talk to her about, how she went about this email? I was so caught off guard because that's not why I forwarded it at all. But there are those kinds of moments too
Yeah.
where you don't realize, oh, this was a nugget of information
Yeah.
about, potentially how I navigated something, when to me, that's not what I was thinking. So I'm not suggesting you forward every email. This isn't grade school where like, hi, I need a gold star and look at my A plus.
Yeah.
But find those valuable moments to you, the moments that you
Yes.
feel proud of, or you think, oh my gosh, I finally got through this person, or I got through this situation. And maybe those are the things that you share. Again, you have to be
Yeah.
authentic to you.
Yes.
But in forwarding that particular email, it actually had a positive impact, not only in the person that I shared it with, but another colleague who said, Deborah, help me do this. And
Yeah.
you don't realize that sometimes those things happen as well, and as part of communicating or sharing some of those accomplishments and achievements.
Yeah, exactly. I know we've kind of talked about managing up and strategic communications in terms of how you're influencing leaders. But with the example you just shared, having a leader who is difficult to communicate with or might be disengaged, is there additional advice that you have in terms of how do you navigate relationships with those types of leaders? I know you mentioned kind of finding a different way through communicating in email and that being successful, but what other advice might you share with, your team or someone who's really faced with a challenge of a difficult leader to connect with?
Wish I could say I didn't have many of those
Yeah.
in my career, but I'm in HR for a reason.
Yes.
Um, I mean, I hate to keep using the same rationale, but it's just true. You have to know the person. This is not a
Hmm.
one size fits all, especially around difficult conversations or more challenging leaders. It's about understanding their ego, understanding what
Hmm.
motivates them. How
Yeah.
do you get through? What kind of tactics work and don't? And sometimes it's trial and error, right? Sometimes you
Hmm.
think, okay, I need to have a face-to-face conversation with this individual, and sort of share
Hmm.
my points about why this is working or not working or whatever the scenario is. But some people face to face, they get too nervous, they get flustered, or the other person gets too nervous
Yeah.
and flustered.
Hmm.
And so you need to figure out, okay, maybe it's a phone call where we're not seeing each other, maybe
Hmm.
it's an email. And preparing is
Yes.
incredibly important during difficult conversations. So even now in my career, I still get nervous about particular
Hmm.
conversations. I still get scared or intimidated. I am human and I'm
Hmm.
okay saying that. It's not easy, especially when you're dealing with a difficult person, because you have no idea how they're going to respond. You just don't. So
Yeah.
preparing yourself. What is your goal?
Hmm.
Stick to your script. Don't get emotional. Don't take
Hmm.
it personally. And that's hard to do. The things
Yes.
I'm saying because they've come through a lot of experience, a lot of advice, a lot of
Hmm.
therapy, but really just trying to understand what works. But
Hmm.
know that every conversation isn't going to go exactly as you planned, for better or worse. I mean, I've gone into
Hmm.
some really serious scenarios where I thought, wow, that went way better than I could have anticipated. You have to meet the person where they are. And that is
Hmm.
so true of so many things, but particularly about this. You are not going to change someone's behavior or their way of thinking if they are unwilling to listen.
Yes.
So, what you have to do is try once, twice, three times, whatever is necessary in this particular
Hmm.
situation that you're dealing with. But at the end of the day, then you need to have a conversation with someone else, your manager, the head of HR,
Hmm.
whomever, to say, I've done X, Y, Z. I need some help. And it's,
Yeah.
again, it's okay to say that. It's okay to call in reinforcements. Some people
Yeah.
won't change, and
Hmm.
that is not up to you to figure out. You need to call on others to help you or have the organization make a different decision about the situation
Yeah.
or the individual.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. You can only control your own actions and your
Hmm.
own preparation and your own way about going about the conversation. Um, you know, I don't want to say there's no point worrying about the other side, but it is. That's all that you have control over, and you can't change how someone is going to react or decide how someone's going to respond. So, you know, that preparation, that flexibility around thinking through the other person's perspective, you've done all you can, and then when if you need to call, asking for help. I think you mentioned that earlier, this idea that you don't need to know everything, you can be vulnerable. I think sometimes people, particularly in a workplace setting, might be hesitant to raise their hand and to say, and I need help with this, or to be vulnerable and say they don't know something, I can get
Hmm.
back to you. But that authenticity and that transparency and honesty about what's going on, that is so key in not just communications, but also building relationships with people throughout the organization. So,
And I think one thing we haven't touched on, and it could be a whole another
mhm.
session, is generations, right?
Yes,
There absolutely
yes.
are individual differences, but there are also
Hmm.
generational differences, right? I
Yeah,
think the up and comers into the workforce are, it's easy for them to say, I don't know. And again, speaking
yeah,
in
yeah.
generalities, I know not everybody. That's my disclaimer.
Yeah,
I'm not stereotyping. I'm intentionally speaking in
yeah.
generalities. They're more inclined to say, I don't know this. but I'll go find out. And I'm sure they'll find
Yeah.
out in 5 minutes. Where some of the older generations, like Gen X, which I am, baby boomers, it's harder for us to say, I don't know, because it's been ingrained in you that you're supposed to know. And if you say you don't
Yeah.
know, well, then that means you don't do your job well. And so there, not only do you have to think about the individual, but there are also generational differences. And back to sort of the topic around communicating and managing up, that's something you have to think about and take into
Yes.
consideration. Not only the how I communicate, but the modality I choose, right? A baby boomer is not going to want you to text them, but
Yeah.
a millennial is fine with it, right? So
Yeah.
it's really adapting your communication style to the receiver of the message. There are a hysterical number of memes around a Gen X manager speaking to a
Yeah.
millennial and vice versa, and how
Yes.
the conversation goes very differently. But those are realities of
Yeah.
the world work we live in, right? This is the first time we've had 5 generations in the workforce.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
when you think about that, you have managers who are managing very different types of people. And that means you're also communicating with other individuals who are coming from very different walks of life. And it's
Yeah.
never been more diverse, thankfully. I'm
Yeah.
excited about how much diversity there is in the organization and diversity of thought. Right. And so you have to take those things into consideration as well, whether you're managing up, sideways, down, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's not the range of generations within the workforce that's just continuing to grow. I know that's been a really hot topic across talent and HR over the past few years as we've seen the changing demographics across the labor market. So that's not something that is going to go away. And you're right. I think not only understanding people's perspectives and communication styles, but from a generational perspective, thinking through what's their preferred way of communicating, how do they receive feedback, how do they want to get the information, that is really key, especially when managers will be in positions where, or people might be in positions where their team is made up of all sorts of different generations now. You know, you might have someone who's a baby boomer reporting into you, but you might also have someone who's an early grad. I'm not even sure what level or what type of generation name they've come up with now for those coming into the workforce. So I think they've had to go back to the alphas or something. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of unique perspectives, and that's what you have to remember. And again, you don't have to know it
Yeah.
all. Trial and error will work.
Yeah. For those who are maybe in positions where they're starting to have more opportunities to interact with senior leaders, there might be some issues around confidence in those types of situations. So can you speak a little bit about, what advice you might have for someone who's starting to gain more visibility and starting to have more interactions with senior leaders, but maybe need a little bit help with feeling more confident about those interactions?
Sure. And this is also is a gender, can be a
Yeah.
gender issue as
Yeah.
well, right? Again, not saying it always is, but it can be. Finding someone in the organization that you do have a good relationship with and practice. It's okay to say, hey, would you mind listening to me do this thing and getting your
Yeah.
feedback on how I approach X? Or, hey, I'm heading into a meeting with so, and I happen to know you have a good relationship with that person. Is there anything you can share with me? Any insights, any minefields? I've done this a million
Yeah.
times in my career to say, are there things I should stay far, far away from? Any hot buttons? That has really, really helped going into
Yes.
especially challenging conversations. Or again, you might think it's the most innocuous conversation and you step in a minefield unbeknownst
Yeah.
to you. And the best that you can do in those situations is just again, be authentic, apologize, say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that was an issue, and move on to something else. But
Yeah.
try to leverage the relationships you have in the organization to pick someone else's brain. Like, hey, you've sat in these meetings. Can you give me a sense of what are they like? Are they contentious? Is it low key? Do I need to come in a full suit? Like, walk me through even the environment
Yeah.
of these meetings. And practice saying things out loud so that it feels authentic to you and it is authentic to you. That's how you gain confidence too. And honestly, you learn a lot from your mistakes. It is
Yeah.
okay to make mistakes. You learn a lot from the things that you do really well and the things that you fail on. We all fail. Or sometimes you walk out of a meeting and you're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I said blah blah blah." And even now in my
Yeah.
career, sometimes that happens, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think throughout, throughout all the conversation today, it's this idea of preparation, practice, and like you said, it is okay to make mistakes. No one's perfect. No one's going to get it right. And it is really just trial and error in terms of getting your messaging across successfully, having these conversations with leaders, thinking about the best way to approach them or the best way that you want to get your messaging across. So,
And
right.
there are organizations where managers or leaders, whatever you want to call them, people, they could even be your
Yeah.
colleagues, who are just, they feel threatened or they're
Yeah.
defensive. Go back to this isn't personal and you cannot
Yes.
change them,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And there, because not everything is going to be, oh, let me practice and sunshine and
Yeah.
roses. I get that. I've lived
Yeah.
through my fair share of what feels like war in some of these meetings that shouldn't be, quite honestly. And you learn from those too. You get stronger and more confident, and you get to a
Yeah.
point in your life where you think, does this matter? In 5 minutes, 5 years,
Yeah.
does this matter? So whatever
Yeah.
your, I run a lot. Running is my therapy. I have lots of great conversations with myself and the world on these runs. And so find whatever your outlet is, because it is important when you feel really crappy after a meeting or you feel like something
Yeah.
went really poorly. Find your outlet so you can move past it, learn from it, and just move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Not letting that kind of dwell in your own head in terms of what could be different when it's happened. It's kind of, it's over and done with. It's on to the next thing. And it might not have made as much of an impact on the other person as you think it might have. So,
Right, right.
yeah. And in those, in those difficult conversations that you might have, I feel like there is a balance to how you communicate assertively, but also respectfully when you are facing those types of conversations. So, do you have any advice around how to walk that fine line in those difficult conversations, being assertive, being respectful, and still getting your point across?
Absolutely. And again, this is trial and error. So I have two stickies on my screen that I'm looking at right now. One is called respond and one is called react, right? So you can imagine what I'm going to say. When you
Yeah.
react to something really quickly, it's usually not well thought out. Sometimes it can sound defensive. It can be angry. It can, you can use humor to diffuse it. You need to respond to situations, not react. And I have
Yeah.
these on my computer because it is a really great reminder to me. Again, I've been doing this for a really long time, but I am still human and I still have
Yeah.
triggers, and there are things or people that still aggravate or annoy me, or I get frustrated. And
Yeah.
again, those are all real people emotions. To think someone else doesn't have those emotions is just flawed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, it's a really good reminder that when you're trying to communicate effectively, it needs to be factual and it
Yes.
needs to not be emotional. So I'm a very effusive, verbose writer and speaker. And you can see I'm Portuguese, I talk with my hands. So for me, I take out the extra adjectives or the extra adverbs. You don't need to say this was so frustrating. No, it was
Yeah.
frustrating, right? Try to take
Yeah.
emotion out of things. And in meetings, same thing. Count to three really quickly, but you can take breaths. Just because there's a
Yeah.
pause doesn't mean, oh no, the meeting's going to come to a crashing halt. That pause will save a lot of anger, aggravation, hopefully de escalate a situation. So respond versus react, whether it's verbal, written, whatever it might be. Take that into consideration as you're communicating. You'll become more effective. You'll see what is in your language, like how you actually write emails or text messages or whatever it might be. Take a step back, reread them. If you
Yeah.
have the time to not send them, I always say walk away. The other things
Yeah.
I say is, if this were to be on the internet tomorrow, would you be embarrassed by it? And people forward messages all the time, whether you think they are or
Yeah.
not. So remember that that is a reflection on you, and we can't hear tone. You cannot,
Yes.
people say you can, but you can't. That you're just you projecting. You, the reader, are
Hmm.
projecting this kind of tone or that kind of tone. Assume good intent is something I think
Hmm.
the world needs a lot of right now.
Hmm.
We assume the worst in someone's statement or personality or an action. I think we need to assume good intent and
Hmm.
then work your way through, okay, what does this really mean? And also don't assume, right? Figure out what it is that you're
Hmm.
trying to communicate or how you're trying to respond to something. Ask the person for clarity.
Hmm.
Well, pick up the phone. We need to do more of that too. We need to have more
Yeah.
personal connection versus assuming a tone in a written piece of paper.
Hmm.
So my biggest advice is respond versus react.
Yeah. Just that reminder of um, taking that pause. I think particularly, like you said, people are very busy. They're trying to get a lot of things done very quickly, and sometimes there's not that minute just to sit, just a few seconds to think about choosing intentionally, how am I going to react to this, or how am I going to respond to this in a way that is thoughtful versus just what comes out first or what comes top of mind first
Right.
and what potential impact that is. So, um, you know, we talk about this idea of, the power of silence and how people can sometimes be uncomfortable in that. But sometimes those moments of reflection and quiet can be the most powerful and can even change the direction of the conversation or the tone of the conversation if we've given it a second to just have everyone pause and think about what's next. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Um, just thinking through, organizational priorities, particularly when it comes to thinking about managing up. But when someone is thinking about, their own personal goals, whether it's a personal goal for a particular conversation or thinking about their own strategic objectives for the next year, how can they ensure that they're aligning their goals with the company's strategic objectives, particularly when it comes to these conversations around managing up and making sure that they're aligning with what their leader is looking for, what the organization is moving towards.
So part of it is actually knowing, right? You'd be
Yeah.
surprised
Hmm.
how many organizations don't cascade goals, don't even have
Hmm.
goals, or they just have the big corporate lofty goals and you can't figure
Yeah.
out how way down here you relate to those goals. So part of it is really understanding what those goals mean and
Yeah.
how it relates to you personally in your
Hmm.
responsibility and having conversations with your manager. And I know not every manager is even equipped to have these conversations. So if you're
Hmm.
not getting answers, go speak to a different manager, talk to a
Yeah.
colleague, go to an
Hmm.
HR professional, go all the way up. Go talk
Hmm.
to a general manager or a functional lead or read things on the intranet
Yeah.
or on your company's website to try to help educate you.
Hmm.
But keep asking questions. It's okay to ask questions because the more those goals relate to you personally, the more energized you'll feel and the
Hmm.
better you'll be able to prepare for conversations or your career planning. Who
Yeah.
doesn't want to feel connected to the bigger picture, right? As a human
Yeah.
being, that is truly innate in who we are. And
Hmm.
so being able to connect to corporate goals or your functional goals, your department goals is really important. So first understand them, right? Really
Hmm.
get as much information as you can to understand how those relate to your specific role. And then step back and say, how do I marry what I want to do with what the
Hmm.
organization needs? Are there skill sets that I want to develop because I do want to
Yeah.
get over here? Are there questions I have about, okay, I'm a manufacturing associate, how do I go into quality? Or
Hmm.
I'm in finance, how do I go into quality or business
Yeah.
development or whatever it might be? Have conversations with people outside of your department. I
Hmm.
think sometimes people are afraid, like, I work in this little silo and I need to stay in this little
Yeah.
silo. You'd be surprised how many people would love to talk to you about what they do or what their
Hmm.
department does. And put yourself out there, have conversations. I'd really love to understand what your department does. How can I acquire the skills? I admire you as a manager. I've seen you in these
Yeah.
departments, meetings. How can I get into your department? What are the skill sets you look
Hmm.
for? and then come up with a plan for yourself, and how that would marry up with what the department needs or the organization needs. Write them down. Have a career map that says,
Yeah.
you know, I want to do X in 5 years, 4 years, tomorrow, whatever it might be, and try to chart it like a project plan almost. And again, when we talk about frame of mind,
Yeah. Yeah.
change the frame of mind to this is a project and it's not me. It is, the project is me, but in your head, think about it as this is a task I have to get done for work. How would I go from beginning to end? Who are the influencers, the stakeholders?
Yeah.
What are the steps I need to take? This again, it's not a one size fits all. It's really about where you are in your career, what your experience is, what your passion is, where do you want to go. And the thing I always say is you can pivot as often as you want. You don't have to, there, you know, career isn't about going vertical. Career is
Yeah.
about vertical, it's about horizontal, it's about life experiences. Everything we do sort of contributes to our path and our journey. And so, you know, take risks, be
Yeah.
adventurous, challenge yourself. We're not growing if we're not challenging, right? And we're not challenging ourselves. And so it's important to put yourself out there and see what kinds of things that you can take on as an employee, as a manager, as a, you know, whoever you might be. But
Yeah.
have conversations and think about the skill sets either you have that people don't know you have, and how you share those with others so that people know, hey, I can tap into this person or that person.
Yeah.
They have this skill set I didn't even know they have. Look at the job postings that the company posts and say, oh, I didn't know you needed to do this. I actually have this, and I would love the opportunity to go into this
Yeah.
department. Think outside the box. Really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's that message underlying all of that around you kind of control your own destiny, you know. I think it used to be that there you go into a particular role, there's a very linear career path in terms of what the next few jobs are, but that's not the way that the world of work is anymore. And companies are looking for you know, opportunities to develop their internal employees across different functions or across different roles, and have more of that you know, interfunctional collaboration. And I think, you know, having those conversations with people outside of your own, you know, functional area really does help you build your business acumen in terms of really understanding those different areas of the business, how that ties back to your particular area. And that really just strengthens your understanding and connecting of the dots of everything going around within the organizational ecosystem. And that can make such a difference when it comes to just, you know, feeling invested in the organization and really coming on board with the organization's objectives as well. So,
And you said something really, really important, the business acumen. It's
mhm.
really important to understand what your company does,
Yes.
how they impact the world.
Mhm.
That I can't say enough about that. It will help you in your career journey. It'll help you understand what you want to do. It will also connect you back to your why, which really is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that maybe that is a question that we sometimes forget to ask ourselves as we get caught up in, you know, the day to day of whatever our role is and the things that we
Mhm.
have to get done. But that's so important in terms of thinking about where I want to go next. What am I passionate about? What am
Mhm.
I good at? What would I like to be good at? And really be
Mhm.
more intentional in terms of, you know, planning for the next phase of your career. So,
And there's that word intentional again.
yes.
It is absolutely a
Yeah.
theme. It really, really is.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Deborah. Before we close, I just have one last question.
Sure.
And that is just, you know, thinking back 5 or 10 years ago, looking at where you are in your career now, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oof. I get this question, but it still always stumps me. I don't know why,
I
because it
know.
probably changes as I get older and she
Yeah.
gets younger or she's farther away
Yeah.
from me. Um, I think one of the things that I would say is be true to yourself. Don't try to fit
Hmm.
into a company mold that, you know, you see these other leaders and they're exceptional at what they do. And so you try to be that person. You're here
Hmm.
for a reason. Be you. Be true to you.
Yeah.
Do what makes you feel good? What lights you up? It really is an individualized life that we live, right? Don't be
Yeah.
someone else. You can learn from your experiences. It's okay to fail. I would tell her,
Hmm.
pick yourself up faster. Don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah.
Every step you take is a step toward this journey, and it is a life lesson. And keep learning, keep being
Yeah.
curious. That is something that I truly value about myself.
Hmm.
I am very curious about people and things, and I would tell her to keep harnessing that, that
Yeah.
she will see how that will benefit her in her career, and really continue to make connections, not only with other people, but with yourself. Don't lose
Yeah.
sight of who you are as you try to figure out this journey of life and this career that you want to have. And in those moments when you're struggling with being a mom, because
Hmm.
I am a mom,
Hmm.
but I struggled, um, you'll get there. You'll figure it
Yeah.
out. Give yourself grace. I would tell her a lot of times to give herself grace and not be so hard on herself.
That's so lovely, Deborah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your expertise today. It has really been such a pleasure speaking with you.
You
So,
as well. I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you. I can't wait to see the series. People can reach out if anyone has questions, you as well. It's been so much fun. So thank you for having me.
great. Thank you so much, Deborah.
Take care.